Alright, so I'm going to talk a little bit today about Scourge and how to burst with it, because I realized when I was looking back through my videos on Scourge that while I'd done a lot of talking about, you know, my opinions of Scourge and Scourge's position in the meta and whether Reaper versus Scourge, I never actually did anything on how to actually go about playing a Scourge. And more importantly, I never did anything on how to fight a Scourge, because obviously, if you don't know how a Scourge works, you're not going to be able to fight him. And I'd also like to take advantage of this video to clear up a lot of misconceptions I've been seeing flying around about Scourge. So, I'm going to start. First off, I'm going to clear up the first misconception about Scourge and how its burst work, is that it's go and drop a shade and spam all the F skills. No. This is how that works. So I've spammed everything. Now look at these fly techs. Yeah, I'm getting a lot of fly tech. Ignore the burning, someone else is hitting it. But that's not a ton of damage. Like, that's not a huge damage he was taking. And that was with the golem sitting in every single tick of a Desert Shroud. You know, you're fighting a live opponent. You're not going to be landing every tick of Desert Shroud. So that burst is going to be doing way less. So like, for example, just hitting 3 of those, you know, I got 4 stacks of Torment at range. And there's the fly text for that. That wasn't a lot of damage. That's not going to kill anything, unless they're already really, really low on health. Now, I can increase this damage by standing on top of the shade, at which point, you know, I see I got a 1k burning tick and some 600k torment ticks. But again, that was for 3 skills. I used 3 of my F skills and burned more than a quarter of my life force to get, you know, 1k burning ticks and 600k, or not 600, good heavens, 600 torment ticks. Now obviously if they're moving, that'll be double torment, but again, that's not crazy, particularly given the burn stacks only last 3 seconds and the torment only lasts, I think, 4 seconds. I think slightly more because I'm using misery sigils on my scepter. That's not a ton of damage. And that's not that huge nuke that you see people whining about. Where the huge nuke comes from is not actually spamming the F skills, it's dropping a shade, you know, applying 1, 2, and then hitting Feast of Corruption, because now you see some serious torment ticks. Because now I'm getting a 1k torment tick on a stationary target. You'll look down here at my damage log. And again, I'm not getting a lot of burning. And I'll go into that later as to why burning isn't actually that exciting of a condi for Scourge. But again, it's the combination of a couple shade skills with Feast of Corruption, because that's the burst. Feast of Corruption is the nuke here. Because, you know, the 2 hits from the shade skills, you know, that'll apply 5 or so condis, which is what I'm looking for, because I just want to get 5 condis so that I can get the max amount of torment stacks from Feast of Corruption, which is 7. So if I can get 5 condis on them and hit them with Feast of Corruption, they get 7 torment stacks, which will easily double the amount of torment or more that's already on them, and that's the scary part. That's what kills you. Alternatively, if I don't have Feast of Corruption available, I may go for Harrowing Wave, which is also a very good damage skill. It depends on what I think I can land. So it'll generally be, you know, drop a shade, try and be in melee range, hit 2 skills, and either hit Feast of Corruption or Harrowing Wave. That's how the burst works. You don't use F5, you don't use F4 for burst. Like, seriously, I see this all the time, I see Necros trying to burst with Desert Shrouds. That's stupid. People will not get hit by your Desert Shroud, because it starts pulsing, they leave the shade. You generally only have 1 chance to nuke someone with a shade, because they're going to move out of the shade if they know it's good for them. So you need to be able to drop that damage on their head immediately. And again, that's another thing, is a lot of the torment stacks, in order to get the best out of your torment, is you need to double stack your shades, because if you only got 1 shade, I mean, you get 1 second torment and then 1 Doomfire, if you're not overlapping. But if I'm standing on top of my shade, so I get a double hit from the shade auto, you know, I'm getting twice as much. I'm getting 2 stacks of torment per hit. So that's another important thing, is the Scourge needs to be stacked on top of their shade to get their huge burst. If you can dislocate them from their shade, they're doing way less damage around you. And that also makes them vulnerable to getting melee'd. Because again, they just won't have the pressure to push people away. And also, this whole thing with double stacking is the reason, or not the reason, but one of several reasons why you always use Sand Savant. I've been seeing some people saying that it's actually better to have Demonic Lore because it's, you know, more damage. No. Sand Savant is more damage. Because again, this huge radius means that I can, you know, drop a shade here, be standing here, and I can still double... Well, okay. Double hit in there. Well, demonstration failed. But you can still stand fairly desynced from the dummy and get a double stack like I did right there. Because again, my circle, which you can't actually see, is overlapping the golem with this, so he's getting a double torment stack. But if I'm using small shades, I'd have to basically be standing right on top of my sand shade in order to double hit. Which also makes double hitting people really, really hard. Because again, you're only affecting the small radius. And the other problem with Demonic Lore is standard shades without Sand Savant have a radius of 180. That's very small. And that is important, not just because of how easy it is to hit people, but because there's a lot of heavy hitting weapons in this game that have just a little bit more than 180. For example, Reaper Shroud. You know, it's a melee shroud, but Reaper Shroud has 200 something range on its skills, which means a Reaper and Reaper Shroud, if a Scourge does not have Sand Savant, can actually hit the Scourge with his melee shroud skills without actually standing in the AoE that comes off of the Scourge. And that's pretty much one of the biggest reasons why Sand Savant is the needed trait, because you need that to defend yourself. And it's the same way, like, most greatsword skills for most classes have more than 180, and greatsword's one of the more common melee weapons in the game. So again, these classes will be meleeing you from outside your shade radius if you don't have Sand Savant. And of course, you also just get more damage from Sand Savant again, because you're affecting bigger area, more double stack, hitting more targets. And I have seen some people still insist that even despite the difficulty double stacking with Sand Savant and the, you know, the range problem, the Demonic Lore is still more damage. It's not, because all it's doing is giving you a 32% damage increase on Torment, but you're applying less Torment because you're having trouble more hitting. The Burning's irrelevant because you only get one stack for it, and that's not a lot. I mean, yeah, it's more damage, but you're already going to be applying Burning from Doomfire, so it's not really a cover condi, and your Torment's your heavy hitter, so whatever. You're always going to get more damage out of Savant, and you'll always stay alive longer with Savant, because again, more melee hate. A couple things to notice about shade skills is double hitting does not give you double Doomfire. So Torment's gone, I only got one stack. So even though I'm double hitting, got double Torment, I only got one stack of Doomfire because Doomfire has a hidden internal cooldown. This is not true of Unyielding Blast. You will double hit with Unyielding Blast if you're using that, which you won't be because you'll be needing soul marks for PvP. But Doomfire doesn't stack, and that's also a reason that optimizing Burning really isn't important for Scourge, because Burning is really just a secondary damage condition to your primary damage condition that is Torment. And also, since the primary damage condition is Torment, it does mean that in a worst case scenario where you get Torment bombed by a Scourge, move the minimum distance to get out of the shade and then stop moving. If you can't cleanse it, stop moving then, because if you've got those 10 stacks of Torment on you, you don't want to be moving. Because, you know, if you're not moving, Torment has a lower base damage than even Bleeding does. And having 10 stacks of less damage than Bleeding, that's not a ton of damage. You can probably tank that. If you're moving, though, you're not going to be able to tank that. Like, I mean, this tooltip pretty much says it all. 2 stacks of Torment, 623 damage if not moving, 1,200 damage if moving. So again, now obviously in PvP, not moving isn't a very good option. You're always going to be looking to avoid the Torment application. And if you can't avoid it, cleanse it or get resistance. Stop moving is your last resort, save me option. Another thing about surviving a Scourge, don't stand in the elite. This thing. I see more people die to this than I see die to Shades. In fact, most of the huge, you know, whole enemy team just gets completely wiped out by one Scourge things. It's because of the elite, not the Shades. Because the elite, every time it rips a boon, 2 stacks of Torment. It's also applying Burning, it's applying Slow. That's gonna wreck anyone in there. Like, if the elite goes down, you get out of it. You don't mess with it. I don't care if you have full Shroud. You don't stand in that crap. It will kill you. Fortunately, it has a pretty lengthy cooldown. 60 seconds if traded, 75 if not, so it's not going to be out a lot. But again, just don't stand in that. Now, about countering Scourge, which is probably what a lot of you are really interested in. So, part of it is just understanding the damage the Scourge does. Because again, like I said at the beginning, you need to understand how the burst works if you're going to counter it. Because I see 2 mistakes a lot of people are making when dealing with Scourge. The first one is they bump charge right into everything and just get shreked. That's the first mistake. The second mistake is they play super conservatively and they never go anywhere near the Scourge and just try and like peck at it from like maximum range. Neither of these strategies works. If you charge in, obviously you're going to die from the AoE do. If you're that guy that's like trying to peck at him from maximum range with some really weak ranged weapon, you're not killing the Scourge, and at the same time you're always going to be at risk of that Scourge dropping a shade on your head. Now granted, dropping shade on your head isn't the worst damage ever, but you're not going to be killing the Scourge. It's going to take forever to take him out if you're just pecking at him from range, which means you're probably going to get +1'd before you kill that Scourge. The correct way to deal with it is, what I've generally done is I'll, you know, get into mid-range and I'll have like an axe on and I'll peck at them from just outside and I'll try and get a feel for how much life force they have, you know, see if I can get them to waste Nefarious Favor or their other skills. Like if you can apply some condies on them just to get them to use their F2 to convert the condies into boons, that's great because you're getting them to waste life force without hitting you. And I'll generally do that until I feel that they've wasted enough life force, and then I'll just charge in. Like, I'll go into Reaper Shroud and just charge them. Because again, like, the Shades by themselves, they don't do a ton of damage. And if I can get into melee range, apply that CC so that they can't use their weapon skills, then the only real damage they can apply while I'm controlling them and interrupting them and forcing them to run for their lives is their F skills, which aren't actually that much damage. And if I can do that, well then I can win, because I will outbrawl them with a Reaper, because I just have such a massive HP advantage. I can tank their shade damage until they die. Of course, you do have to be careful, because there are some good Scourges out there, some really good ones that know how to bait people into doing that. But so you also need to be able to watch cooldowns. You know, have they used their elite? Because you don't want to just charge in and then have them drop an elite on your head and then immediately F4 you so that you're feared in the middle of their elite, because you're dead if that happens. So, you know, you'll generally want to get an idea. Obviously, they won't always use this, and sometimes you have to take a risk even if you don't know. Another thing that most Scourges will do is they'll stand near some sort of escape area, like a ramp or something, or a staircase. And when you start chasing them, they'll pop Trail of Anguish and then run up it. And if you have to follow them, you have to run up the Trail of Anguish. If they do this, there's not a lot you can do. The best case is to pop out a Corrupt to hit the stability that they get from Trail of Anguish, which will fear them. And then the moment they get feared by that and their stability's gone, hit them with another fear if you can, or some other stun, like Chilled to the Bone or something. That way they're stuck in place while their Trail of Anguish wastes. However, if you can't do that and they do run up the staircase or whatever, or small tiny path, don't follow them. Because again, the reason they pop Trail of Anguish and then rain up that thing is to try and force you to follow them up this whatever jumping puzzle they're on, which is going to be narrow, so they're trying to force you to follow up this narrow path that's full of Trail of Anguish. Just don't. At that point, it's better to just back off, you know, maybe heal up a bit. And the moment the Trail of Anguish starts to dissipate, then follow them. Obviously, they may use this gap to use their heal skill. But, you know, it's still better for them to do that than you to eat a whole bunch of Trail of Anguish, because that's just, again, unnecessary damage. And the whole trick to fighting Scourges is avoiding all unnecessary damage. On anticipating bursts. So, like I said earlier, a lot of the burst comes from weapon skills, which means if they drop a couple shade skills on you, they're probably going to be casting a Feast of Corruption or a Torch skill at the same time. So if you get hit with that first shade hit, dodge. Even though you just got hit with a shade, dodge, because you'll probably cause them to miss their Feast of Corruption or their Harrowing Wave, because they're probably going to be using one of those two things immediately upon hitting their shade skills. Now obviously they can cast those F skills while casting Feast of Corruption, and if you get hit with that, and that's a lot harder to dodge because there's very little telegraph on that, unless you're sufficiently good at the game that you can just, you know, watch their character model for that Feast of Corruption animation. So if you get hit with that, that can be, you know, kind of a instant nasty thing. But at the same time, you know, if you can get good at anticipating those shade skill usages and those bursts, you know, you dodge that, they just wasted Feast of Corruption and shade skills, so they're in a lot of trouble. And for anticipating shades, obviously shade skills hit instantly. You know, there's not really a telegraph. You can obviously see an animation once they've gone off, but, you know, that won't save you from the damage, because again, it is an instant hit, but you can usually anticipate it. One thing I like to do for baiting is if I see a shade or a Scourge sitting in a shade like this, I will Reaper Shroud straight to them, and the moment I get here, like even before Reaper Shroud 2 actually hits them with the final tick, I'll dodge roll. Because what Scourges will do is they see, oh look, here's this guy charging right into my shade, let me press my F skills. But you've already dodged, you're already starting dodging, so you can get them to waste their cooldowns. They've now got cooldowns on their throwaway F skills, is what I call them. And what those are is, you know, a Scourge will generally burst with these two, because these are the cheap ones. You don't want to waste these two if you can avoid it, because they're so expensive. So you just get them to waste their burst and waste life force if you can dodge them. And that'll give you a few seconds envelope to get some hits on them for needing to get out of that immediate shade radius. And of course, if you've got a weapon, you know, like an axe or something on Necromancer or some 900 or 1200 range, you can obviously just arrange them. Power Reaper or Axe's low damage weapon, you probably won't kill them quickly with an axe, so you generally will want to go for a melee attack with Shroud.
I could use a hand over here.
But you can, you know, whittle them down, get them to waste life force and such with your axe. Another thing to pay attention to, does the Scourge have Plague Signet? A lot of Scourges don't run Plague Signet in favor of Spectrals or whatever, because the F2 is a good enough Condi clear combined with Putrid Mark that they don't necessarily need to have Plague Signet. And you can take advantage of that, because if they don't have Plague Signet, they can't transfer Condis onto you, which is a really one of the more effective ways Necromancer has for Condi bombing someone is just with Plague Signet. If they don't have it, they can't do that. Of course, if they don't have Plague Signet on their bar, you know that since they're not running it, they're probably going to be running a Spectral. Since you should always assume a Scourge is running Sandswell and Trail of Anguish, because that's generally the meta pick, is Sandswell and Trail of Anguish. Now, if you are playing a Scourge, and you are thinking about if you should put Plague Signet on your bar, generally what I always consider is, does the other team have a Necro? If the other team has a Necro, you take Plague Signet. If they don't, you don't take Plague Signet. That's basically how it works, because with Condi Necro, if you're a Condi Necro and you get in a fight with another Necro, it's going to come down to a transfer fight. And not having Plague Signet is a good way to lose that transfer fight. So that's why Scourge should generally always be using Plague Signet if you're fighting other Scourges. And if you're a Reaper fighting a Scourge, you'll probably also want to have Plague Signet just to have that extra transfer. A few other miscellaneous notes. Another thing I'm seeing Scourges doing is taking Sadistic Searing all the time. Generally, I don't actually find that useful. I have been playing around with Scourge. I don't like playing Scourge, but I do play it, and I do know how to play it well. Sadistic Searing, while it does reduce the cooldowns on a lot of your utilities, the only one of these utilities where that really matters is your elite, because, you know, that 20% is a 15% reduction on that cooldown. But, I mean, adding 5 seconds to these skills, it's not too bad. Like, because you're not going to use any of these skills, these 3 skills on cooldown, so realistically that extra 5 seconds doesn't matter too much. And Unending Corruption here, this gives you another corrupt, and it gives you an AoE corrupt, because I can just, you know, drop this shade on a bunch of people and just boon rip all of them. Which is, you know, Life Force from Nourishing Rot. And it's also a corrupt, and that's very important, because this is a corrupt. Unending Corruption is a corrupt, and not a rip, like the punishment skills do. Obviously, Trail of Anguish, it doesn't corrupt, it gets rid of the boon and then applies Torment and Cripple. But the corrupt from Unending Corruption, it works like Core Necro corrupts do, in that it converts on a convert table, which means you can convert stability into fear by dropping a shade on someone. You can convert resistance into chill by dropping a shade on someone. You can convert quickness into slow, and that's generally more useful. For most boons, you would rather corrupt them than convert them into torment. A lot of people have that backwards. A lot of people are saying that, you know, convert to torment's better than boon corruption. No, it's not. Because boon corruption, that's cover condies, and a lot of them are nasty. I mean, obviously, protection only converts into 3 stacks of vulnerability, so that's not too good, and that might be something that you would rather rip with a punishment skill. But stuff like stability, you're always going to prefer to corrupt rather than rip stability, because you get a fear out of it. Might, that converts into weakness, and that is a very debilitating condition. Swiftness converts into cripple, which is okay-ish. Now granted, you do already apply cripple with your punishment, so that doesn't really matter too much. Regen converts into poison. That's big. That's 33% less healing. That's a huge thing. Especially, and that's particularly important given that the classes that have good regen accesses are all usually classes that are self-heal based defensively, like Guardians and Rangers. You know, classes that depend heavily on their self-healing, so be able to convert their regen into poison gives you a huge leg up on them. And that's something that ripping doesn't do. So that's, again, that's another favor for Unending Corruption. Another thing, this is all just miscellaneous. If you're fighting a Scourge, the first thing you want to figure out is, are they running curses or are they running blood magic? If they're running blood magic, it's super easy. They have last rites. Boom, you see that? They have last rites, you know they're running blood magic. This means they'll have more sustain and they can transfuse people. And that's important to understand, because Scourge has the fastest power res in the game, I think, except maybe Scrapper. Because transfusion on Scourge, it's not a channel, so you can actually be pulsing the transfusion pulses while also channeling a res on someone. So you end up with, you know, the Scourge hits transfusion, they pull someone to them, they're getting transfusions, they immediately hit res, so that they're now doing the regular res, which also puts down the Ritual of Life well, which revives at 7% per second. So that means that person on the ground's now taking the regular revive speed on top of Transfusions 2 plus Ritual of Life 7, so they're taking 9% downstate revival per second. That's a crazy fast res. So if you see a Blood Magic Scourge, you'll want to kill that. Also, a Blood Magic Scourge, while it does have more healing, it does not have Path of Corruption, and Path of Corruption is another important reason why you need to immediately understand is the enemy Scourge Blood Magic or Curses. Because if they don't have Path of Corruption, you don't have to worry about your stability too much. So like if I'm a Reaper and I know they're running Blood Magic, I'll run in there with Reaper Shroud and I'll pop that Shroud 3 skill for its stability and then use that Shroud 3 skill to either take advantage of its damage reduction to, you know, tank some shade bursts or just to fear the Scourge. But if they're running a Curses build and I pop that, you know, they could hit an F2 and corrupt that into fear, which could really mess up my attack. Of course, if they're running a Curses build, they don't have power res capabilities and they don't have as much self-healing. They obviously, if they're running Carrion, they'll probably have Parasitic Contagion. But that's nowhere near as much healing as they get out of Blood Magic. And of course it also means they might have Blade Signaling, they probably don't have a lot of crit to make good use of this, so that's not too big of an issue, and these two are just bad miners. Generally, most solo queue Scourges I see run Blood Magic just for the sustain, but there are a lot of Curses ones running out there too. Is there anything else I need to say? Talked about the Elite, I talked about Trail of Anguish. Oh right. So if you're fighting Scourge and they're in Scepter and they go into Staff, they're probably, that is a good sign that they're probably low on Life Force if you see them swap into Staff, because Staff is their defensive give me Life Force weapon. It's not a very good offensive weapon on a Condi class compared to Scepter. So whenever if you're poking at them from range, you see them swap into Staff, that's a good signal to charge them and melee them because they're probably low. Of course, you do need to be mindful that they do have a Fear on the Staff, and they do have Chillblains, and that Chill can really mess you up. But again, that's just what weapon they're in is a good indication on how much Life Force they have. Yeah, that's basically it. So I'll end the video there.